Welcome to Emotion Well, EFR's podcast about all things related to emotional wellness. I'm Johanna Dunlevy, the Wellness Manager for Employee and Family Resources, also known as EFR, and I'm the host of our podcast. As an FYI, EFR is located in Des Moines, Iowa, and we are Iowa's first employee assistance program and provide a variety of services you can learn more about at www.efr.org. Welcome. I'm excited to be here with Jones Loflin today. Jones is a coach, keynote speaker, and author, and I believe the first author we've had on the Emotion Well podcast, so I'm excited about that. I connected with Jones on LinkedIn probably maybe 6 months ago, and then as I started seeing more of his content, I subscribed to his newsletter, I followed him on YouTube, and then I started engaging more with his posts, and then I started seeing more of his posts, and we connected, and here we are recording a podcast today. So Jones, welcome to Emotion Well.
Well, thank you, Johanna. Yeah, it's interesting how that algorithm works. That once you say, "Hey, I
Absolutely.
kind of like this content," it starts throwing a lot more of it to you. I'm glad it did, and of course, I see more of the work that you folks do, and so that's been a value to me as well. So glad to be here today.
Yeah, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. I've been a keynote speaker and author kind of in that training development space for 30 years. Started out as a classroom teacher many years ago here in North Carolina. And my work is all around helping people make better choices with their time so that they can thrive, in the ways that are important to them. My favorite way to do that is to use models. We're going to talk about one of them today.
Okay.
But whether it's, how to deal with work-life overload, you need to run off to the circus. Or if you need to improve your focus, the best way to learn to do that is to open a hive of bees and look at them. And then, of course, the model we're going to talk about today with leadership is, being a gardener and having a gardener's mindset. So I love doing that because it helps people realize they have the answers within them. They just didn't have a framework for how to take that next step forward. And so I really
Exactly.
enjoy seeing that light bulb go off and people finding solutions to their challenges so that they can, accomplish what's important to them.
Exactly. And I think all of those topics, whether it's, not having the time or being able to make the time for something, not being able to focus or, trying to navigate your way through leadership, all of those are applicable in any kind of workplace or setting. And so I'm excited to dive into the leadership topic with you today, as well as some of the other topics if we end up kind of segueing there. So leadership is a very rewarding role that many people find themselves in, but it's also a complex role.
Mm.
And so from your, many years of experience working, and I've looked at your website and bio, and you have a nice breadth of experience working across different organizations, white collar, blue collar, higher ed, agriculture. What are some common themes that you see, kind of regardless of what the industry is that you're
Mhm.
working with, as it relates to leadership challenges, and especially leadership challenges in 2025?
Yeah. Wow. I think one of them is communication. Communication across generations. We've been talking about communicating across generations for years, but I think it continues to be a challenge for leaders to figure out how do I customize, how do I tailor, how do I make sure this message resonates with this person who's in front of me instead of trying to just talk to my team in a generic way, and then it doesn't land with certain members of the team. So I think that's one thing. Second one is just the rapid pace of change. And I know people back in the 50s, if they were having podcasts back then, would be saying the same thing.
Yeah.
But it really is. There's so much changing, and along with that, uncertainty. Uncertainty about what this is going to look like. What does that need to be? What are our competitors in the marketplace doing? What are we going to? And I think that just creates a lot of uncertainty. And so, team members look to their leaders to provide that consistency, that vision, and that's hard
Hmm.
when you don't know what the future is going to look like. And then I think the third one of many is that overload. It is that leaders are just tired. In many cases, they're working so hard to get all of their things done, to be there for their teams, and they aren't as intentional about investing in themselves for that recharge and renewal, which
Sure.
in turn helps them be their best for
Yeah.
their team.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the multiple generations in the workplace and communication, and I think that's so important because as, the baby boomers are starting to phase out of the workforce and Gen X is going to be kind of the elder workforce generation, and then we have millennials and Gen Z. It's like, on any given team you could have a makeup of, different generations, which is actually a good thing in my opinion
Sure.
because
Oh,
they
absolutely.
all, provide
Hmm.
different perspectives and can be very valuable contributors and they can learn from each other. But I think a common mistake leaders do make is that, especially if, I'm a millennial, I'm an old millennial, I'm like on that cusp, I'm the oldest millennial there can be, right? I'm in my early 40s, and it's like I may choose as a leader to communicate in my preferred communication style, right? So that
Hmm.
may be sending, an email. But I have on my team, I have two team members. One is a generation behind me, one's a generation ahead of me.
Mm.
And to assume that we all would want to communicate in the same way, and even if we were all in the same generation, we may have different communication preferences. But I
Yeah.
think, what you're used to and comfortable with, especially technology wise, is going to drive a
Hmm.
large, portion of your communication preferences. So I like that you brought that up. And then the other thing you said was about it's just hard to be a leader, right? And I said it's a complex and rewarding role.
Hmm.
But I think what can kind of get lost is how important it is to take care of yourself, and just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you don't show up with a lot of other things, right? So we
Yeah.
all have lives outside of
Yeah.
work. And
Can I give
it's,
you an example there, Johanna?
yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
one that was just it was fascinating to me. I was doing some work in with a healthcare group. In fact, I was speaking at a nursing conference, and they had all the nurses there from this healthcare organization, and the CNO was there, and the CNO asked an amazing question when she addressed the group. She said, "How many of you in here aspire to be in?" How did she say it? How many of you in here aspire to be in the next level position within your field? So like being a nurse supervisor or those things. Only about a third raised their hand.
Hmm.
And I'm like, wow. And so after the conference was over, I was talking to some of the people. I says, why didn't more people raise their hand? She goes, oh, they see what a headache it is for those people in director positions and management positions, and they don't want to do that. And I thought, that's scary
Yeah.
that leaders and managers, some by choice and some by expectations of the organization, are working in such a way that people are saying, "I don't want to do that."
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I've witnessed that in workplaces where I've been. And I also
Hmm.
think when you mentioned how, team members want a leader to have clarity and provide, reassurance and direction. And sometimes, especially if you're in kind of that middle manager role, sometimes if you're not getting that
Yeah,
from
yeah.
your leaders or maybe an executive or a C-suite team,
Hmm.
then it's really hard to provide it to your own team members. And so you kind of find yourself stuck in the middle of, you're also asking some of the same questions maybe, but now you're in a position where you're asking them and trying to answer them. And so I think that provides very unique challenges. What about in the last 5 years? I'm just curious, how did your business trajectory grow during the pandemic? So we're right at, like, as we record this episode today, it's like around the fifth anniversary of when everyone was sent home to work from home if they could. Um, how did that change kind of the demand for your coaching, and
Hmm.
how did you start to work differently because of that? And what were you
Yeah,
seeing?
yeah. Number one for me was, of course, people wanted what we're doing, more because that's what it had to be online. It had to be
Sure.
in a format that they could digest it other than being on site. So that was the delivery model looked very different. And of course, like other people, I scrambled. I mean, I was doing some virtual presentations, but once everybody's doing them, then you need to improve the quality of what you're doing. Content wise, it was interesting. It was what I got was, how do I get work done remotely or from home?
Yeah.
Because that's really most people were doing it. How do I get things to home? Because people thought that they could simply, open their laptops on their kitchen table and woohoo, let's get to work. And they forgot there's a bazillion distractions
Oh,
that
yeah.
are pushing on them, and work looks very different. And so so you had that where people weren't really sure how to work. Then you had managers and supervisors who were used to gauging people's success by hours and not outcomes.
Mhm.
And so then you had that conundrum. So a lot of it was around how do I, focus? How do I be productive in that remote environment? And secondly, how do I, communicate more effectively with both my team and those that I report to make sure the right work's getting done.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. And I
yeah.
think depending on what your preferred leadership style is, I think it was hard for some leaders who maybe want more observational control of what their team members are producing, right?
Yeah.
They're maybe not used to providing those levels of autonomy that a work from home environment is going to have to kind of rely on. And
Mhm.
so I just think it's interesting. And now there are a lot of workplaces going back. It's kind of the opposite. It's
Yeah.
like it's a return to the office mandate versus return or work from home mandate. But I'm just curious what you've seen in terms of
Mhm.
trends in the last 5 years, because I think it really has changed the way people think about work.
Yeah.
And depending on the type of work you do, I think in some instances it can provide more work-life flexibility. And in
Yeah.
some, it can, maybe be worse for that because maybe you feel like you're always connected to work, even when you're working from home. In my situation, at the time, I was the mother of a young, she was 3 at the time, so she's 8 now. It was helpful for me because I didn't have daycare options. And so I was
Mhm.
able to, I'm not saying I produced the best work during that time. I was distracted, but I was at least able to have an option to work from home with
Yeah.
my child. So
Yeah.
let's talk about authenticity in
Mhm.
leadership,
Sure.
because I think sometimes when people are promoted into positions of leadership, they maybe feel like they have to um, put on a different persona, right? They're a leader now. They're, maybe in charge, or maybe they feel funny because they were once peers with their team members and now
Yeah.
they've stepped into a role of leadership. So how can people, whether they're an established leader or they're moving into a leadership role, show up with a certain level of authenticity that, is conducive to team building and trust?
Yeah, yeah. The Disney Institute, I think it was them, had a phrase that when it comes to working with people, enter on the human side and exit on the human side. And I love that phrase because
Yeah.
we have to remember first and foremost, we're working with people. We're working with human beings. It's you've got a lot to accomplish, but the only way you're going to accomplish it is by having a strong, productive, positive relationship with the people who are going to get the work done.
Hmm.
So it's not about the work, it's about the people who are going to get the work done. And so I think where authenticity is so important is it begins to build that engagement, that connection with others that compels them to want to commit to getting the work done versus complying to say, okay, these are the tasks, let's get them done. So I think when a leader is authentic, when they're willing to show who they are as a human being, to acknowledge their weaknesses in a way that are healthy, that the teams go, okay, I can connect with this person, I can work
Yeah.
with this person, versus that individual who comes in and who has more of a mechanic's mindset or something. Said, okay, here's the problems to be fixed, let's get to it, kind of thing.
Right. Well, I think also, I mean, you have to have boundaries around what you share as a
Hmm.
leader, but I think if you can be, you know, transparent, in a way that's professional and holds good boundaries about, if you've got a team member going through something challenging in their personal life, it's a, if you're comfortable sharing and if it's appropriate sharing, I've been in a similar situation. I
Hmm.
understand you might need a little more time off right now, or I understand you're going to show up to work and it's going to be really hard to focus. I've been there. I know in my experiences, anytime a leader has shown me grace when I've been going through hard times or has been vulnerable and said, I understand, I've been there too. It
Mm.
kind, as a team member, kind of just makes you relax. You're like,
Yeah,
okay, they know
yeah,
I'm human. They don't see
yeah.
me as the person, executing these, roles and responsibilities. They
Hmm.
see me as a person who's
Hmm.
got stuff going on in life. And I think that's one thing that at EFR we really try to emphasize with the organizations we work with, and then with the leaders in those organizations is that your team members are showing up and you as leaders are showing up with what we call an invisible suitcase, right? And it's like your baggage and we all have it. And
Yeah.
so your invisible suitcase might have, you know, anxiety, single parenting,
Mm,
financial stress, and your invisible suitcase could have things that are, maybe a little lighter and more positive, like you're planning a wedding, you're expecting your first child or grandchild. But those things we carry with us, and we always say you don't
hmm
check it at the door. You don't
Yeah.
check your invisible suitcase at the door when you come to your office, or when you go home at night, you're carrying some, things in that suitcase from work with you, right? And I think the more we can see our team members as people with complex lives,
Yeah.
who need support, and that
hmm
leaders need support too, the more likely we are able to connect and engage. And like you said, that's, it's focus on the human
hmm
being, right? Not the
Yeah.
human doing aspect of it. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
and can
Let
you
me,
repeat what you said about Disney one more time? Because I thought that was really good.
oh,
The
sure.
entry and exit.
Yes, it's always enter on the human side and exit on the human side. Example is you may need to talk with a team member about something that's not working, whether it's in a manufacturing environment or it's a process. And so you're thinking, okay, I need to talk to Johanna about this. And so you can take the mechanic's mindset of going, okay, we got to fix this problem, Johanna. How are we going to fix this problem? Whereas if you enter on the human side, Johanna, how's your day going? And you say, fantastic. Joanna, what does fantastic look like in your world?
Exactly.
And you say, well, hey, my 8-year-old, woke up happy this morning, or she got this event, and you're going, oh, that's fantastic. And then you can transition into working with the problem or the challenge
Yeah.
in that way, and it just feels so much more natural and positive to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think as someone who's as a team member receiving that information and that conversation, you feel like valued. I think you feel
hmm
more valued and like, hey, they see me as a person. They're not just here with an agenda, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the other thing is, it can be challenging as a leader because in many instances you do have things that you have to get to. You have
hmm
problems you need to solve, you have questions that maybe need answered. But if you approach it from that perspective every time, it's probably not going to do much for relationship building. And I think there still are a lot of instances where, leaders don't know much about their team members because they
Oh,
haven't taken that.
yeah.
And it's not a lot of time. It's a short amount of time. And it's really kind of just a habit, making it a habit of doing that. So
Oh yeah, it is so easy because you said a moment ago about it's this their job, solve problems, which is true. Behind every problem, there's a person. Notice I
exactly.
didn't say the person's a problem, but
Right.
behind every problem, there's a person, and working with that person and growing the person is what's critical if you want to improve your team. It's not, okay, we got to solve this problem. It's okay, how can I grow this person? How can I develop this person? How can
Mhm.
I provide the resources to this person so that they can address at least some part of the problem? And who knows, if I do a good enough job, I might never even see this problem again because they're going to know what to do the next time they're in that situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I also think just when you're working on a team and you are in a leadership role, recognizing that people all are going to work differently, right?
Yeah.
They're gonna have different communication styles, like we mentioned earlier. They're going to have different life experiences. They're going to have different things going on in their lives, and so don't make assumptions. I think it's easy to make assumptions, right? We know exactly what's wrong. We know exactly how to fix it, but we don't always
Yep.
have those answers, right? And if we
Yep.
don't take
Yep.
the time to get to know the person, we'll probably never come to the best solution,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Can
So,
I can I can I can I share with you two questions that I
absolutely.
teach leaders this, and I love doing this because number one, it's simple, and I love the simple. But secondly, it gets a chuckle out of people. But I think there's two questions you have to be able to answer about every team member to do exactly what you just said. Is to know them. The first question is, what makes them tick? What's of value to them?
Yeah.
What do they like to talk about? I mean, and that's everything from understanding their Myers-Briggs to their colors, their insights, their Enneagram, whatever. But what makes them tick? What's of value? What's important to them? Now, that's the first question. Here's the second question, which is very similar. What ticks them off?
Yeah, I
You know,
love that. What
if
makes
you
them tick and what ticks them off.
yeah, if you know what ticks them off, then you know what to, as much as possible, avoid or minimize in
Yeah.
conversation. Or if you know that this is not going to be something pleasant for them or something you're going to disconnect, you can plan for that and how you
Uh-huh.
present the information, which again goes back to the fact it's different. That those two questions, the answers are different for everybody on your team.
Absolutely.
But how can you accommodate what's important to that person, that person, that person in the conversation, and also have those individual one-on-ones where you can more specifically address things that get them excited or the
Yeah.
things that are concerning them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love that. I was just thinking back when I had a larger team, the five love languages.
Yes, 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 yes.
So was reading the book and I was like doing it more from a personal perspective. And then
Hmm.
I had this light bulb moment where I was like, oh, well, my team members have love languages
Yep.
too. And I was able to identify, one of them was really big on words of affirmation.
Yep.
One of them wanted quality time, really liked it when we worked side by side and I, spent a little more time with her. And
Hmm.
then another one was acts of service. I really liked it when I would help, step up and do some of the
Hmm.
things for her. And it was just when I had that moment, I was like, oh, like I need to be treating them all a little differently, right? In their one-on-ones, in our interactions, in the way we, tackle problems together and the way we, work on projects together. So
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of value in, like you said, figuring out what makes them tick. And then I like the what ticks them off because I haven't really thought about that side of the coin as much. Like
Hmm.
I feel like I can, identify with my team members right now what makes them tick, but I have to kind of take a moment to go, well, what ticks them off? I could most likely come up with it,
I'm
right?
sure you could.
But I don't think we always think of it in that term. So I really like that.
Good.
I'm just curious, you mentioned, there's colors, there's Enneagram, there's
Mhm.
MBTI. Do you have any opinions on how helpful or useful those are in the workplace? Do you feel like they can help people have a better understanding of themselves and others, or do you think they can sometimes box us into a type or,
Mm. Yeah.
a way of maybe being that
Yeah.
isn't helpful?
Yeah. I'm going to start with that last thing you just said about box. Um, one of my daughter is a certified Enneagram coach, and so I have been through osmosis have been around it a lot, and she and I have presented at some meetings, and she's done Enneagram with groups, and I love one of the things that she says. She says the Enneagram is not meant to put you in a box; it's
Hmm.
to help you get out of your box.
Yeah.
And I think that's true with any type of personality assessment is it's not to put you in a box, it's to help you get out of your box. It's to help you to grow. It's to see where what you're doing is working
Hmm.
and where the way you're doing things are limiting your success and how could you improve to get the results you're looking for. So I think that's very important. I think it's very valuable if we see it from that perspective. Secondly, I think sometimes unfortunately we weaponize, if we're a leader or manager, we weaponize the personality assessments or the results and say, well,
Yeah.
that person's a this, or because that person's this, they won't or they will, or I think that's dangerous. And I
Yeah.
also think it's dangerous if we use those things to portray ourselves as a victim. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm just ENTJ, or I'm just and I think, wait a minute, you're saying you don't have the ability to grow, to do better. So I do see tremendous value in them if they are used effectively, and also not just thrown at someone, and it's okay, you're a whatever, you're a blue, you're a gold, and then they
Yeah.
go, huh, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because then it confuses them, and that's not helpful. So I think it's important with your teams, if you're going to do some assessments, spend the time to help them understand it, how it can be useful, and then do follow-up sessions where you talk about those things. Where did you see this behavior show up? How was that helpful?
Hmm.
So that people can really leverage those tools to improve.
Yeah. I think some people do approach those assessments with more of a fixed mindset where they're like, well, this
Hmm.
is just who I am.
Hmm.
But like you said, if you can be more growth oriented, like, hey, these are your tendencies or characteristics,
Hmm.
but these are also things that you can do to, work with them, work through them. If you, are, an Enneagram 7 and you're working with an Enneagram 3, here are some, good communication styles. We did some Enneagram uh, workshops at EFR. It was fascinating. I enjoyed it. And again, you have to approach it from the right perspective. And I think it's important for people to remember that, it's not because you are a certain number or a color. I've even done ones where I was like a bird, I think, years and years ago. Like just because you're, typing a certain way doesn't mean that that's how you're always going to be or that you have, limitations
Right.
because of that. So
Yep.
I have a couple of your books here. I have Focus as a
Ooh.
Bee, which I'm reading right now, and then Always Growing, which I've already read. So we'll talk a little bit more about this one
Okay. Well, thank
because
you.
it's about leadership and how to
Mhm.
be a stronger leader in any season. So tell me a little bit about, first of all, I love the way you write your books. They're written from a storytelling perspective, which I think helps people understand and they can remember more, I think, of the messaging. But I'm just curious, how did you come to write this particular book and what inspired you to focus on leadership as something that people grow through and grow
Mhm.
with?
Right. Well, first of all, I grew up, I know you're in Iowa, I'm in North Carolina. My dad was an avid gardener. And
Okay.
from the time I was 5, I would follow him around, and he would, you're not going to know this, Johanna, because you said you're an older millennial. No,
Yeah,
no, no,
I'm
no. Yeah,
42.
you're an older millennial. We didn't have to tell your age, but you're an
Oh, I'm
old.
proud.
Well, I'm 58. Hello.
Hey.
And so my there used to be these things called seed catalogs, and they had a special section there for kids where if you sent them 1 cent, they would send you a pack of a variety of seeds.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, oh yeah, it was fun. And so it would come in the mail, and my dad would give me the packet, and we'd go out and make the row, and I'd plant the seeds and wait for them to come up. And it was just a really cool experience then. So I've always loved gardening, growing things. Actually went to college, North Carolina State University in agricultural education, became an ag teacher.
Okay.
And so I taught horticulture, those things. And so then I transitioned into speaking, training, and development. And as we talked about at the beginning of the segment, I love, with models and talking about, ways to teach people things and that kind of stuff. And so while I've done one on, managing a working life like it's a circus, that was Juggling Elephants, I'd never done one based on one of my passions, which was gardening, growing things. And so I was reading in a magazine years ago, Peter Singh, a change management guru, who said, when it comes to leadership and leading change, we keep bringing in mechanics when what we need are gardeners.
Mhm.
And of course, as a former horticulture teacher, I'm like, that's beautiful, And so I started thinking, what does that look like? What does that mean? And then I started doing some research to say, does the research back that up? Does it support that? And I'll never forget some of the research I found, and so much of it said, yeah, too many people in leadership try to attack problems and challenges with a technical mindset, mechanic, instead of looking at them adaptively. Gardener, being creative, looking at things from a different perspective. And so from there, it grew, pardon the pun, but it kind of grew out to I was practicing it. And of course, I used it with some of my clients, and eventually became, the book that you see now is Always Growing. So that's the journey to get there. I just think there's such opportunity for people when they look at the people they are leading or managing as possibilities, gardener, versus
Mhm.
problems, mechanic.
Yeah, no, I love that. How do you see storytelling working in the workplace, in a team setting? You've got a leader, you've got team members. Because I love the way you write your books. I think the stories are memorable, and I think it helps people understand the point you're trying to get across. So, can leaders do something similar in the workplace through storytelling?
Yeah. I think storytelling, the most important things about storytelling is that it makes you more authentic. We talked about that a few moments ago.
Yeah.
It's personal, it's human, it's your story. And so I think when we share stories that people can immediately humanly connect to, we've already got their attention then.
Hmm.
And so now they're tracking with us, as we would say, and then we can begin to make the point as we go through, or tell the story and make the point at the end, so that people go, oh, okay. And the beautiful thing about a story is that it doesn't need to be perfect. It's not a model or a blueprint. It's my perspective.
Uh-huh.
And you'll begin to see my perspective, my values, what's important to me when I tell a story. And then you can release it to the group to say, what did you get from that?
Yeah.
How do you see our situation in light of that story? Um, I think about that, Johanna. Part of my background includes working for the company Who Moved My Cheese,
Yeah.
the book about change.
Yes.
And so it was fascinating because that was my first exposure to this model, this metaphor type approach. And I read the book, was a huge fan of it. It changed my trajectory of my career and helped me to see things differently. But it was fascinating how when I worked for that organization, and at that time I hadn't worked with a lot of large companies, and so I will never forget going to US Air in 2000 something, early 2000s. And here I am, no name presenter. I don't have any, I don't have former CEO or anything titles behind my name. Here I am with a group of US Air executives, helping them through change. And I'm like, what have I got to offer? You talk about
Yeah.
imposter
I was
syndrome.
gonna say, did it
And
feel like imposter syndrome?
I mean, it was all the things, and I'm scared to death. But I was there to present as a facilitator the story of Who Moved My Cheese using a video and questions and all those types of things. Joanne, I got to tell you, when it was over, I'm like, this is magic. Because
Yeah.
what you do is you present the story, and people go find out where they are.
Yeah.
And if I know where I'm at, that'll help me know where I need to go next.
Yeah.
And I was just blown away by that. And so that was what was the impetus for me to say, as much as it's possible, that's what I want to do in my speaking and training career, is come up with a model that people can go, there's where I am, here's where I want to go. Now, how do I get there? Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I love
long
that.
answer to your question about storytelling, but I think any story we tell, if it gives people opportunity to assess where they are and assess
Hmm.
what needs to happen, I think it has value.
Yeah. I also think storytelling opens up dialogue, right? It's going to maybe get people to maybe listen more
Hmm.
attentively,
Hmm.
contribute, in a different capacity. And so I think, and that's another thing I want leaders to remember is that people are all going to have different comfort levels and different ways of processing information and sharing, especially in a group setting. So when I was in grad school years ago at Drake University, I remember I take a little more time to process. Like I'm an internal processor, right? I'm not the
Hmm.
person who's like just jumping up right away. I'm not raising my hand first. I've never been like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Not that I can't be like that, right?
Hmm.
But it's just not, I like to take information in, think about it, and then
Hmm.
share. And I remember sitting in a graduate studies course, and we sat in a circle, and there were maybe like 20 of us. And we went to lunch, and I got back from lunch a little earlier than my other classmates. And the instructor said something to me along the lines of, you just don't really contribute much. You've been really quiet. And it wasn't because I didn't want to contribute or didn't have anything to
Hmm.
contribute. It wasn't my style to sit in a circle with 20 other people, wait for my turn, and say something. And so that was an important moment in my life
Hmm.
because instead of kind of feeling like I'd done something wrong, which I kind of felt like that was why he was bringing it up,
Hmm.
like to say, hey,
Hmm.
you're too quiet, basically. It was like, I
Wow.
just process things differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm getting as much information out of this, and I have as many valuable things to share. I just want to share them in a different way. And so, as a leader, if you're facilitating a team meeting, right, there might be some people in that meeting that want to talk to you privately one on one, or would
Yeah.
rather break into, smaller groups, or maybe they are comfortable talking in front of, 15, 20 people.
Hmm.
But I think that's important too, is like, and it goes back to communication, which was, I think, the
Yeah.
first thing you brought up. Communication is, one of the most critical components to, effective leadership. And so not just how you prefer to communicate, but how other people want to receive communication and how they're comfortable communicating. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's so true, and it's just like going back to our gardening, analogy is that every type of plant has a different growth habit,
Yeah.
and has different needs to thrive. You don't grow carrots, blueberries, and fruit trees the same way. They have specific
Yeah.
things that they need to grow well. I think it's the same is true with people. You're right. Some people are going to thrive in that group of 20 because they just
Mhm.
love the energy they get from hearing, oh
Yeah.
yeah, that idea reminds me of this. Then you've got that person sitting there and say, I'm not comfortable here. That I would rather be having a one-on-one where I can, process, have time to process and not feel like I'm, being judged. Who knows,
Yeah.
what's, and so I think you're right. It is important for leaders to acknowledge that and to remind themselves that and say, what's the environment that's going to help this person thrive?
Yeah.
When they're at work or when we're
Yeah.
meeting or whatever it is, what is the environment that's going to help that team member thrive? And then as the leader, trying to create that. I mean, you can't create a perfect environment for everyone, but what can you do to remove some of those barriers or obstacles that's preventing that person from being able to, here we go again with the garden, but to thrive, to blossom, to bloom, to
Right.
to
Right.
to branch out,
Right. And if they're not, what adjustments need to be made? Do they need more sunlight,
Exactly.
more water?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
is it?
and we laugh, but that is so true. It's like whenever in these presentations, sometimes on Always Growing, I'll ask the question to the group. I'll say, "Does it help to talk to your plants?" And of course, most people in the room will raise their hand, and I'll say, "Okay, somebody tell me why is it helpful to talk to your plants?" And of course, you'll get somebody who will say, "It's because we give off carbon dioxide, and the plants can take in oxygen." I'm like, no. Of course, by this time in the presentation, they know I'm kind of snarky, but I'm like, the parts per million doesn't work. The reason it helps to talk to your plants is because you're paying attention to
Yeah.
them. You're looking to see what they need.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're nurturing them.
exactly.
Yeah.
You're paying attention to their needs and saying, okay, here's what you need to grow better. Yeah,
Well, and
absolutely.
I think, and as I said, the word nurture, I think in some ways that almost feels like the opposite of leadership to some people. It's too
Mhm.
soft. It's too feely, right? It's like, but no, like leaders can be nurturers, right?
Yeah,
And they can
yeah.
have really good outcomes.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Let me, can I
uh,
can I share an example real quick with you there? Just
absolutely.
because it is so true what you just said. I was doing some work in Yokosuka, Japan, at a Navy base, and I was working with a group there on change that particular day, and there was this really large, hulking Navy guy up front, and you could tell he did not want to be there, Johanna. I mean, you've had those people in your
Oh,
presentation
yeah.
sometimes. They would just rather be somewhere else, and I'm doing my thing, and most everybody else is buying in pretty well. Well, this person at one point, I was going through the kind of the stages of acceptance for change and how people, are at different places. Like you
Yeah.
said, they're different places. And he slammed his pen down. He's Jones. If my CO tells me to change, I change. That's the way we do it in the Navy. And of course, I am going, okay. What do you say to that? Because you could just feel the people in the room going,
Yeah.
yeah, and thank God his CO was in the back. I thought he'd left, but his CO, I just kind of glanced back there. He says, "May I have the floor for a moment?" Go ahead. His CO said, I can't even remember what the person's title was, but he said, "If I haven't earned your trust by the way I have worked with you, you will merely comply with my order, and compliance is the lowest form of engagement." And
Yeah.
I just looked over at the guy. I'm like, "Does that help?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
because that you're so right. It's you've got to nurture, cultivate. Stanley McChrystal, retired from U.S. Army, talks about the mindset of tending. He uses the word tending. You got to tend to your team, and
Yeah.
their stocks are fragile. And I'm going, wait a minute, this is an Army person saying
Yeah.
this? But it is. It is leadership. It's the kind of leadership that gets results long term.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
Absolutely. Have you been, so psychological safety is a big topic, especially in the mental health space. Is that an area that you think you might explore or do any writing on?
It's interesting you asked that question. My daughter Sydney has had a journey with her mental health and mental wellness, and it opened our eyes. I say I, or Lisa, my wife, and I. It opened our eyes to just how complex and the needs that are there. Um, And can I just, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute.
No, get on it.
And
Stand tall and proud.
just how woefully inadequate our society is prepared to help folks
Absolutely.
who, I mean, and I just, it's scary to me for the individuals who are going through those journeys. And Sydney is in a healthier place now. She's a huge advocate, as we are, for mental wellness and
Hmm.
mental health. And so, in answer to your question, it is something I'm passionate about. It's also something I think you have to be very careful with.
Sure.
And so I think there's some amazing work that's out there on improving your mental wellness, and a lot of resources were sent Sydney's way, have been sent Sydney's way over the years, as to us. But I don't know. I haven't really thought
Yeah,
about it that much. It is something that's extremely important. I think the biggest thing that I can do right now is to help people understand that it's okay to say, I'm not okay.
absolutely. Yeah,
Um,
and I think as, for leaders, if you're listening to this episode and you're a leader, know that your team members are going to have mental health just like they have physical health.
yeah, yeah.
Sometimes it's great and sometimes it's poor,
Hmm.
and you don't know, how someone is going to show up, at
Hmm.
work. And so to be a supportive leader is really important. And EFR provides employee assistance program benefits to workplaces and organizations. And whether you have our EAP or someone else's EAP, especially if you're a leader, knowing that that exists and that you can make gentle recommendations and referrals to your team
Hmm.
members who you may notice are, having a change in their productivity patterns, or, maybe they're showing up and they just seem a little different.
Yeah.
Hey, don't forget you have an EAP benefit. It's a confidential
Beautiful.
resource you can reach out to. And oftentimes, because there is a shortage, it's a healthcare
Hmm.
crisis, in terms
Hmm.
of mental health resources.
Yeah.
EAPs can get people in a little sooner,
Hmm.
generally speaking,
Beautiful.
than going off,
Beautiful.
but to find someone on your own. So
Hmm.
thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
that.
Oh,
I have
and
one
one other
last.
thing. Okay, one other thing. Again, I apologize for keeping. You're such an interesting. You ask such great questions, Johanna, and you say such amazing things that it makes me think about things I want to say. Um, I think it starts with us as leaders and managers,
Mhm.
supervisors. A perfect example that I've been using with myself this year is that when somebody asks me how I'm doing, I'm more honest than I've ever been
Yeah.
before. Somebody says, "How you doing today?" I'm frustrated, and they're like, they don't know what to do with me
And
for a
sometimes that
moment.
makes people uncomfortable, right?
Exactly. It does make some, and so you have to know your audience, you have to know your people, but
Yeah.
and so sometimes you've got to temper that, but to be willing to say, I'm feeling kind of frustrated right now. I'm trying to work through this technical issue, and I just can't figure it out.
Yeah.
Other than that, my day's gone really well. But just offering a little bit of insight, authenticity, to
Exactly.
say, things aren't perfect with me. And that invites that other person to go, oh, I thought it was just me,
Exactly. Yeah.
in those
Yeah.
moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one is alone in those moments. I
Yeah.
also think, going back to your enter on the human side, exit on the human side, if you are a leader and you're going to put that into practice, be prepared, that you may get responses that aren't
Yes.
good. How are you? I'm fine. Someone may show up and feel, and honestly, if someone is comfortable enough to say, I'm not doing so well today,
Hmm.
then I
Hmm.
think you're doing something right as a leader, because this
Oh.
person is comfortable with you. They trust you. They don't
Hmm.
feel like they have to be someone else in front of you. I think that's a great sign when someone can
Yes.
say, I'm not doing so well today. And then as a leader, having some tools in your toolkit to know how to navigate that.
Hmm.
Is it a referral to an EAP benefit? Is
Hmm.
it, do we need to reschedule this meeting? Would you
Hmm.
would you like to talk another time? Just knowing how to respond, because if we start, making these conversations more about the human being, just be
Hmm.
prepared that you might have to switch kind of how you facilitate those conversations if things come up. So,
Yeah. That's
uh,
so important. Absolutely. And I like what you're focusing on there, Johanna, about supporting
yeah,
that person versus what some people do, and I've been guilty of this too, shifting. Somebody
yeah,
says, "How's your day going?" I've just had a crappy day. Me too.
yeah,
Then you have just invalidated that person's
yeah,
response, and they're not going to tell you anything else. They're not going
yeah,
to talk to me else. It's just so important to support them. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah,
Do we need to reschedule? Do you want to reschedule this meeting? Could we, or even saying, hey, you know what? let's take 50, would 15 minutes, or would tomorrow for the meeting be helpful? And at least it shows that person that, yes, you care about them as a human being. And the most important thing is them, and that you have confidence the work's still going to get done,
Yeah.
um, and not put them in such a stressful environment.
Yeah.
Great insight there, Joanna.
And supporting and not problem solving.
Mm.
It's not always your responsibility to solve some. I mean, and if you're someone who wants to be a helper and a fixer, sometimes we jump into how can we
Yeah.
fix this? What can we do to make this better? That's not necessarily what the person is looking for in that moment, and it's not always your responsibility to do that. So
Hmm.
I think support is the way to go.
Yeah.
Support, don't make it about you. Don't try to problem solve, just support
Yeah.
them at the moment.
Yep.
This has been a
Absolutely.
lovely conversation. I have one
Thank you.
random question for you.
Ooh, random. I
What
like
you
random
mentioned that you
questions.
went to Japan. So what would you consider the coolest place you've ever been for keynote speaking or book tour or any kind of coaching that you've done?
Okay. As far as going for work, I think a few come to mind. I would think a lot of them are international, or not a lot, but some of them are international just because it's like, wow, somebody from another country invited me to come do this thing. I think certainly I did some work in New Zealand a few years ago.
Ooh.
That was incredible to be able to work with different business organizations in the country there. So I'm going, wow, I'm really a long way from home. I was in Lima, Peru. I don't know, 4 or 5. Well, it's probably prior to the pandemic, so at least 5 years ago. But I was in Lima, Peru, and I was working with the education group there. And I will never forget at the banquet that evening, I'm sitting there, and one of the school groups is playing "We Are the Champions."
Okay.
And I'm sitting here in Lima, Peru. Listening to a high school band from Peru play a song that I used to, jam out to, if that's the word, in high school.
Absolutely. I love it.
So yeah, that was one, and then another was Poland. It was
Okay.
interesting to go to Poland and to have interpreters there. I was working with a manufacturing facility in Łódź, Poland. So a lot of those have all been very meaningful. Honestly, Johanna, as an Enneagram 2, anytime I've been able to take my family with me, to those events, it's
Yeah,
really cool because I'm doing the work stuff, and then when I'm done, my family and I get to go do the fun
I
stuff.
love it.
Yeah, that makes a real memorable place for me.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I'm just excited that you've been able to put a passion into work. And I'm guessing that work doesn't feel like work for you because you're so enthusiastic about all of these different topics. And I would imagine that when you get asked to speak, be on a podcast, do consulting, that you're just thrilled for these opportunities and that you get to kind of live out your dreams. So, and you're making a difference. I think that's one
Oh,
thing
thank you.
too, that kind of going back to grad school was, for me, it's like, am I making a difference?
Mm,
And is it in one person's life or a group of people's lives? But I feel like through your books and through your speaking engagements and all the information you share online, you're making a difference in a lot of
oh,
people's
thank you.
lives. And
Thank
so
you, Joanne.
for that,
Appreciate
I
that.
hope you feel great satisfaction for, the career path that you've chosen and all the opportunities that it has brought your way, because quite frankly, it sounds amazing getting to do
Well,
the
thank
the
you.
work that you do. So
Well, you're kind, Johanna. And now, if we went back to different parts in my 30 years, we might have had a different discussion. Ask
but
me
it's
how I felt
all,
in May of the pandemic. The pandemic going, huh? But you're right. It's a mosaic, right? It's a
yeah,
body of work that we look back on versus those specific moments that bring us the
absolutely.
most fulfillment and joy. Yeah.
Absolutely. So how can our listeners connect with you online? And I'll include this in the show notes, but if we can
Oh,
just
wonderful.
say it out loud here.
Absolutely. Of course, my website is, it's the most general place is jonesloflin.com, where they can see more about the work that I do. Like you, I'm active on LinkedIn. So
Okay.
I would love for their first step to be go connect with me on LinkedIn, and they can that way they can see more of my content there, and I want to connect with them as well to see what's going on in their world. But those would be the two main places. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. My most active social media platform would be LinkedIn.
All
And
right.
as you said, Johanna, you're going to provide my information. If there's anything that I've talked about today, or somebody goes, "Huh, I'm curious," send me an email. I
Perfect.
love having follow-up conversations or
Yeah.
email exchanges with people who've been, because I love learning. That's one of
Yeah.
my, we talked about assessments of Strengths Finders. One of my top 5 is learner. I love learning about other people and what their challenges, what their problems, what their opportunities are, and what do I have in my world that might be able to be of value to them to help them, move forward.
Very cool. And it's Loflin for Laughlin.
Correct.
So it's Jones,
Correct.
Jones, Laughlin, Loflin. So I'll put this in the show notes,
Beautiful.
but I know not
Sure.
everyone looks at the show notes. So I always like to spell things out. And if it's okay, I'll pop your email address into the
Oh,
show notes so it's a little
absolutely.
easier for people to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. This has been a wonderful conversation. And like I said, I think you've been making a difference for many people. You're making those ripples. It's going to have a ripple effect. And I'm just excited to expose more people to your great work. So
Thank
thank you so
you.
much for being on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Johanna. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Emotion Well. Employee and Family Resources, or EFR, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization located in Des Moines, Iowa. We support communities, workplaces, and schools with comprehensive behavioral health services. If you would like to contribute to our mission, please click on the donation link in our show notes.